My husband may have cheated on me with my dead best friend and had an affair baby. Before we dive into the story, please consider subscribing to my channel. It will really help me grow and create even more content. Now back to the story. I don't even know where to start. The past 6 months have been an absolute clusterfuck, and it only seems to be getting worse. My best friend since elementary school, whom I'll call Alice, passed away in February from cancer. She had a 2-year-old daughter who went into the custody of her mom after she passed away, whom I'll call Alexis. Last month, Alexis showed up on our doorstep unannounced, telling my husband he needs to take responsibility for his child and either take custody or start finally paying child support. She says that Alice had told her when her daughter was born who the father was, but didn't want anything to do with him. To answer the inevitable, Alice was a traveling nurse and made a lot of money, which is the only reason I can think of for why she didn't go for child support. During this conversation, my husband had the worst panic attack he's ever had, so we had to end the conversation before I could get more details. My husband's story is, I don't even know. He said that Alice's daughter is probably his, but that it isn't what I think. Almost 3 years ago, we threw a large housewarming party as we just moved into our dream home. After I finally finished residency and was set to make real money for once, Alice was in town and set to be at the party, but I was called into work before she got there. I didn't get back till after 3 a.m. The party was winding down. My husband was passed out upstairs, and Alice had already left the party, which at the time I did find strange as we hadn't seen each other in months. My husband claims he woke up in the middle of the night to Alice on top of him, but he passed out again before he could say anything. He claims he never told me because he was worried I wouldn't believe him, which I don't know if I do. He showed me some texts he sent his best friend the next day asking for his advice about him thinking someone raped him. But if he cheated, he could have had that conversation as evidence, especially since he never said Alice specifically. Ever since the party, he has been very distant with Alice, and after she had her daughter, he would even find excuses not to be around the house when she would visit at all. I don't know if that's because he cheated or if Alice did actually rape him and this was his trauma response. I've known Alice since we were children, and she had never come across as that kind of person. But I've also known my husband for over a decade, and he's not once ever given the inclination of a cheater. He's an attractive guy, and I've seen the looks he gets at the gym, and he's never even given more than a glance. What the hell should I do? How do I figure out what the truth is here when Alice isn't even around to defend herself? She never even implied she liked my husband, let alone wanted to sleep with him. I told my husband he needs to get a DNA test before anything is decided on the child's part, but in the meantime, he needs to move out while I think about what I'm going to do here. Edit. After talking with you, I've come to the realization that my husband is being truthful. My best friend forced herself on him. Several people pointed out that with Alice not liking my husband, if it was an affair, she would have told me when she was dying, if only to separate us. You're absolutely right. I was there in the room while she passed. I held her hands for days. We talked about so much. If it was just an affair, she would have told me. But if she raped my husband, she wouldn't have said a word. That's the type of thing horrible people take to the grave. I've also come to the realization that I made a terrible mistake asking my husband to leave for a few days while I gather my thoughts. Not to make excuses, but losing my best friend to cancer, a long cancer fight at that, was brutal. To say that I was devastated wouldn't do it justice. That it happened only 6 months ago, I'm still feeling it every day. So to have this thrown on me, it's like I'm losing her all over again. Either she betrayed me and fucked my husband, or she betrayed me and raped my husband. Not only have I lost her, but now I've lost the good memories, an entire lifetime's worth. It was impossible for me to look at him and not also see her and be struck with the horror and realization of that loss all over again. I felt I needed to be able to break down, grieve, and think without the fresh wave of loss I got every time I saw him. It was wrong of me to ask him to leave. You're right though, and as of a few minutes ago, I've righted this wrong. I called my husband, I apologized, told him I believe him, and begged him to come home. He'll be here in half an hour at most, and I'm going to support my husband the way I know he would have supported me. I've been an off and on Reddit user for several years, and sometimes the advice given on subreddits like these can be a bit hit or miss, but today you guys did good. You've helped me realize not only that I was wrong in being stupid at that, but that I was hurting the person who needed me the most. I was selfish. I have no idea what we're going to do as far as the potential daughter is concerned, but I can assure you we'll deal with it together. It's going to take a lot of time and probably a lot of therapy to grieve this new loss. I feel numb now as though I'll never cry again. My best friend raped my husband, which means she was no friend of mine. She flaunted it, coming to my house, sitting with me and gabbing. She brought her child here, trying to rub it in his face right in front of me. She tortured the man I loved, and I was an unknowing party to it. I feel sick to my stomach over how many times she came over, just to hold it over him. I'm honestly at a loss on how to make that up to him. If you all have any ideas, please feel free to give them to me. I think I'll need all the help I can get. Tomorrow, I'm going to take a leave of absence from work, just until we can figure out our next steps and we can get our heads on straight. I've gotten a lot of messages asking for an update, so I finally sat down to write one. After everything that happened, this update won't answer all your questions. If anything, it'll raise more. First, I want to say that I love and trust my husband. Asking for space to think was a mistake, but at the time I was overwhelmed. Losing my best friend again and fearing I was losing my husband sent me spiraling. I realized my mistake and made it right. Now for the update. I took a leave from work and we spent time reconnecting, talking, and figuring out our next steps. We spoke with a lawyer, and my husband was clear he wanted no involvement but was willing to provide financial support if needed, so we agreed to a D&D test right away. Turns out, Alice's daughter is not my husband's. We tested twice, both results were definitive. The first test was one we ordered ourselves, and the second was court-ordered after Alexis refused to believe it. For a moment, I wondered if this was a setup to force my husband to admit to an affair. But after talking to Alexis, that doesn't seem to be the case. Alexis claimed Alice told her in strict confidence that my husband was the father, but only to be told if Alexis passed away before the child was old enough. The only reason she came to us now was because she needed money and thought I deserved to know about the affair. To me, this only confirms what I already suspected. Alice assaulted my husband with the intention of getting pregnant. She clearly had other partners, and one of them is the father, but no one knows who. I suggested Alexis upload the child's DNA to Ancestry, but since Alice traveled for work, who knows if anything will come of it. I've washed my hands of the situation. Alice caused enough damage, and I refuse to invite more into our lives. My husband and I have been in counseling and will likely continue for a long time. This situation deeply affected us, especially my husband. Healing will take time. To answer some questions, no, there's no hidden diary or messages explaining Alice's motives. No, we're not getting divorced. This experience was painful, but we've stood by each other through the worst of it. No, we're not adopting Alice's child. Even if she'd been my husband's, we wouldn't have. I want to thank everyone who supported and advised me. To say you helped save my marriage is an understatement, but I do have some good news. During my time off, while my husband and I focused on our love for each other, I got pregnant. We're expecting our first baby, a girl, in just over 3 months, and we couldn't be more excited. And no, before anyone asks, we will not be naming her after my ex-best friend.
I rejected my husband for the first time, and his reaction grossed me out. My husband and I have been trying to spice up our relationship, or rather, I've been the one actively trying, he's just going along with it. The other night, we were watching a romantic movie with some spicy scenes, and I suggested we pick out 2 items from our collection to use later. His reaction, a half-hearted, "Do we have to?" followed by a joke about one of the toys. When we got to the bedroom, I brought out the box, and he picked one item, the simplest option, and when I asked him to choose another, he flat out refused. Honestly, it felt frustrating. I've been trying to keep things exciting, but every time I bring up new ideas, it feels like I'm dragging him along. I felt so disheartened that I told him I didn't want to be intimate anymore. For context, this is the first time I've ever turned him down, while he rejects me at least a few times every month. His response? He told me to come back to bed or he was going to get really upset. That reaction felt extreme to me. I tried to explain how his attitude makes me feel unwanted and undesirable, but he refused to have the conversation, and now I'm sleeping on the couch. We're already in couples counseling, so now I'm wondering, what am I supposed to do next? Edit. Just to be clear, at no point was I pushing him to do anything he didn't want to do. The collection we have was a compromise because he put so little effort into keeping our intimacy alive. For example, I've asked him to blindfold me for 5 years. He doesn't say no, he just sighs and says, "Do I have to?" I've told him before that these kinds of reactions kill the mood. And while he says he wants to try new things, the moment we're in this situation, he acts like it's a chore. I feel like I'm constantly putting in the effort. Meanwhile, He's never once given me a massage without me asking, and out of the few times I have asked, his only response is always, "Do I have to?" This whole situation has me reflecting on a lot. I actually cried earlier today when I found out a couple we know recently took a pottery class together. I haven't even bothered asking my husband to do activities like that in years. Why? Because the first few times I did, his responses ranged from "Do I have to?" to flat out saying, "I will never do things like that with you." I know living like this is holding me back from being happy. Maybe it's time to start taking steps toward moving on. My husband went out with a friend, and when he got back, we finally talked. Here's where things get even harder to process. My husband is a struggling artist. He works part-time at a regular job to make ends meet. His friend, also an artist, told him that his wife covers a larger portion of their bills, but she's happy to do it because she believes in his work and wants him to follow his dreams. My husband then hinted that I am not a supportive wife like she is. That hurt because here's the reality. I'm also an artist. On top of my own creative work, I hold down both a corporate day job and an evening job. I also freelance on the side and earn about $15,000 a year from my art. Meanwhile, my husband's art consistently loses between $2,000 and $10,000 per year. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment, one of which is entirely dedicated to his art studio. I don't have a studio space of my own. I work from our shared living areas. Beyond the financial side, I've spent so much mental and emotional energy supporting his career. He's even missed social events, trips, and family gatherings to focus on his art, and I've always given him the space to do that. Our friends constantly praise me for being the cool, supportive wife, and I genuinely believed I was. So, hearing him compare me to someone else's wife, implying I'm not supportive, feels like a slap in the face. I'm exhausted. I just wanted a simple, happy life with someone I love. But right now, it's looking like we might be heading for a divorce. I'm hoping we can keep it amicable. But deep down, I'm preparing myself for the worst. What a disappointment.
My husband and his family disowned his mom after her affair. I didn't. Now the emotional consequences are taking a toll on my marriage. Need advice. I'm 28, and I've been with my husband 29 for 7 years, married for almost 1. Our relationship has been genuinely good. I love him deeply, and we've built a life I'm proud of. He fits in perfectly with my family, and I've always felt welcomed by his. I'm close with his younger brother and his girlfriend, but the person I've always shared the strongest bond with, his mom. A few years ago, when I went through a tough depressive episode, my mother-in-law was one of the only people who truly showed up for me. She didn't just treat me like her son's partner, she treated me like family. I've always loved and appreciated her for that kindness, but recently, everything changed. Just after Christmas, my father-in-law sat the family down and revealed something that shattered everyone. He told us my mother-in-law had been having an affair and that it wasn't the first time. Despite trying to make things work, he couldn't do it anymore. My husband and his brothers were devastated. They cut off all contact with her, and she moved out shortly after. I understand why they were hurt. Infidelity is a huge betrayal, especially after decades of marriage. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't forget how much she was there for me when I needed someone the most. A few weeks ago, she reached out to me directly. She said she was struggling to pay rent and didn't know who else to ask. She sounded anxious and desperate. Without thinking too much, I decided to help her. It wasn't a large amount, and she was incredibly grateful. Then, she asked if I'd meet her for coffee. I said yes. When we met, she broke down. She told me she had tried reaching out to her sons, but none of them would respond. I didn't try to fix things or justify her actions. I just listened. That evening, I told my husband about it and he completely lost it. He said I betrayed him and went behind his back, and he walked out of the house. The next day, I tried to explain where I was coming from. I told him I wasn't choosing sides. I just couldn't turn away from someone who once showed me kindness. He barely responded. He just told me not to do it again. When his brothers found out, they were disappointed too. They said I crossed the line and should have respected their decision to cut her off. I feel stuck. I never meant to hurt anyone. I wasn't trying to ignore their pain. I was just trying to act with compassion in a difficult moment. But now, I feel like I've damaged something really important in my marriage. I'm not here to justify my actions. I understand why my husband is hurt. But was I really wrong for helping someone who was once there for me? I need advice. How do I navigate this moving forward?